unlocked and into the dark. Some things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever home. Is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner, is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner, is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion? I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson with Reality Shifters and the International Mandela Effect Conference, and you're now listening to Dark Wolf's Den Show on Ripon Common Sense Radio.
Ripon Rabbit Hole is a community-driven radio. At times the community comments may reveal prejudices and other beliefs that we or our sponsors do not condone. Views or opinions expressed by the community, callers, or guests are those of the individual speaking and do not represent the views or opinions of this site. Ripon Common Sense content is intended for mature audiences only. Enjoy.
Hello.
Lasers.
Hello.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
This is your man Meta, aka Propagate This Light, and you're now listening to Dark Wolf's Den.
Are ghosts real?
We had 1,000 hours of continuous communication with the spirit world.
Does time travel actually exist?
The laws of physics seem to be compatible with time machines.
You know, sometimes I wonder about reincarnation, don't you?
A 4-year-old boy in Adelaide, Australia, has told his parents that he used to be Britain's Princess Diana.
What would happen if the world found out that aliens were real?
I didn't say disclosure would be easy, but what is the alternative?
To establish a space force as the 6th branch of the armed forces.
We have so many questions and yet so little time, so to have you here, the pleasure is all mine.
Coming to you from a secret mountain cave, hidden deep within the Idaho wilderness. This is the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and we are broadcasting live worldwide from a secret mountain cave hidden high up in the beautifully snow-covered peaks of the Idaho mountains. Ripping through the electromagnetic soup, tearing through the atmosphere, and tunneling away into your radio like a quantum particle. This is the Dark Wolf's Den Show for Thursday, January 28th, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are talking about psychic phenomena. Of course, if you are a psychic, you probably already knew that, huh? We got a lot to cover tonight. We're going to hear from a physicist named Russell Targ. He's going to blow our minds with a band TED Talk. That's right. You know how I love my band TED Talks. All that and more coming up tonight, January 28th, 2021, on the Dark Wolf's Den Show. But first, today in history. On this day in 1887, a snowstorm occurred in Fort Keogh, Montana, which produced the largest snowflakes ever reported, being 15 inches wide and some 8 inches thick, ladies and gentlemen. That is some huge snowflakes. And I've got snow coming down here. I've had for about 2 days now coming down. We got quite a few feet. So I could only imagine how much we would have if the snowflakes were 15 inches by 8 inches. That is some big snowflakes. Those are piles of snow falling out of the ground, and that's what happened on this day in 1887. And that is today's Today in History. Could you guys imagine 15 inches wide? Each snowflake 15 inches wide and 8 inches thick. That is insane. That is over a foot wide per snowflake. I mean, I've had snow falling for 2 days now, and there's a lot of it. But I could only imagine if each snowflake that fell for 2 days was over a foot wide. That would be one of my definitions of supernatural, right? And speaking of supernatural, the consciousness discussion always brings up these supernatural points, as we've talked about all month long, things that science has no way to explain using their limited scope of scientism to work through. However, there is things like psychic abilities and remote viewing and just all the stuff we've talked about this month so far, of course, OBEs, NDEs, last night's discussion, just so much stuff about mind over matter and just these effects that science cannot explain. And tonight's speaker is going to speak on psychic phenomenon as a part of consciousness, right? As we've all heard of remote viewing, I'm sure, things like that. And this is going to kind of walk the line on the remote viewing. Our speaker tonight, Russell Targ, is an American physicist, parapsychologist, and author, best known for his work on remote viewing. He's also well known for his early work in lasers and laser applications. So this is a really smart guy who's looking into topics that would be considered fringe by even the best person that practices scientism. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Russell Targ.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. My name is Russell Targ, and I'm a physicist. And it's my great pleasure to tell you about the remarkable work we did at Stanford Research Institute investigating psychic abilities.
And we heard last night about the Pear Lab out of Princeton University, and I guess now it turns out that Stanford University has done its own research projects on the mysteries of consciousness.
We did that for the CIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, NASA, and many, many other intelligence agencies, part of the U.S. government intelligence system.
And it always amazes me. If you ask science or scientism, let's be honest, about consciousness, as we know, we've heard all month long, they will tell you it's a happy accident of the brain, and things like remote viewing or psychic phenomena, they just can't happen. That's paranormal. That's not real, right? However, things like detectives who use psychics to help them solve cases. Things like the U.S. government who've used psychics to do remote viewing and many other projects seem to think that it is very real, opposed to the, quote, scientific explanations, end quote, given to the public.
I got into all this as a childhood magician, standing on the stage in New York doing mental magic. And I had the experience from time to time of having a direct perception of something in the life stream of the person whose mind I was pretending to read, or whose fortune I was pretending to tell. So I was not a real psychic. I was just a kid doing magic.
And it must be clear there is a major distinction between illusion and magic and actual psychic phenomenon, because you can make it look like psychic phenomena using cold readings and other tricks, but there is a huge difference, and there is a realm of psychic phenomena and a realm of illusionary magic.
But I've now talked to people like Kreskin and Melbourne Christopher, and they said, oh yes, every professional magician knows that from time to time you're given some material, and you can then supplement your magic trick with whatever ESP comes to you. And there are many magicians who do that, as we know.
And as most of you guys know, Mr. AJ the Ripon Rabbit, our other network host here on Ripon Common Sense Radio, is also a lifelong magician, and I'm really curious to find out whether he has had these experiences himself. If you're over there in the chat, AJ, I would love to know, have you had experiences where you've done mental magic and ended up getting an ESP stream from somebody, these visions of their life streams like most other magicians have reported? That is intriguing to me.
But I was not doing magic for the CIA. Because as we know, the CIA is not easily amused, and we were trying to do the real thing for them.
So once again, we find a government agency, this time the CIA, who is extremely interested in these topics that, again, according to scientism, or what we call science, isn't supposed to exist.
The work we did at SRI involved things like finding a downed Russian airplane in North Africa with code books on it, locating a kidnapped American general in northern Italy, looking into a Soviet weapons factory in Soviet Siberia, describing the construction of a huge Soviet submarine in northern Russia. And we even looked on a Chinese atomic bomb test 3 days before it was scheduled to go off, and described correctly that it was going to fail. So we did quite a lot of useful things for the government during our 23-year program.
Those sound like some pretty strong hits to me, and the really intriguing one here in this whole list he just gave is the last one that he talked about, with the bomb test that they knew would fail 3 days prior to the actual test even being done. It's things like that that make you scratch your head and wonder how any of this is possible.
The ability we're talking about is a natural psychic ability that we all have, in spite of what you may have heard to the contrary.
And I can tell you that until I'm blue in the face on this radio, and it ain't going to make that much of a difference, as opposed to if a physicist says something like this, the guy who's got the piece of paper from a university to back him, people tend to listen a little bit more. So let me go ahead and rewind and play that piece just one more time.
The ability we're talking about is a natural psychic ability that we all have, in spite of what you may have heard to the contrary.
A natural psychic ability that we all possess. That is extremely important. And it goes back to my idea of the hive mind, or you can call it hive mind, the collective consciousness, whatever you would like to call it. Just the idea that this consciousness has the ability to know what's coming, is outside of time as we know time to be.
People can quiet their mind and describe and experience what's happening in a distant place or in the future. And this has been talked about for thousands of years. Buddhists have a vast lore about what this is and how to do it and why it's desirable. And I'll try and talk about that later.
And I've said it before and I'll say it again. I really feel that the Eastern religions, the Asian religions, have it a lot closer to right than the Western religions tend to. They will talk about things like reincarnation, things like psychic abilities, things like remote viewing, things that the Western religions and the Western science is impossible. The Eastern religions talk about as if it's commonplace.
The ability allows you to quiet your mind and describe and experience what's happening in the future, and you can do that independent of the distance. The most interesting thing that we found as physicists is that it's no harder to describe what's happening in Soviet Siberia 6,000 miles away than it is for you to describe the funny object I have in my pocket. 6,000 miles away does not decrease the accuracy or the reliability as compared with something nearby. Looking into the distance is no harder than looking at a contemporaneous event, and that's why this is called a non-local perception.
Non-local perception, and that is an interesting fact from the physicist there, that the distance makes no difference whatsoever. And if that sounds a little strange to you, think about quantum physics and entanglement. Two entangled particles could be as far as the opposite ends of the entire universe and yet would still be able to communicate with each other. So this isn't as far-fetched as it sounds when you start looking into the underlying physics of reality, which is called, again, quantum physics. And it is interesting that information can be sought like this. And, you know, it doesn't matter if, like he said, it's in Soviet Siberia or 2 foot in front of you. The non-locality of it, of the perception, is going to make you be able to see regardless of the distance and be able to get details and information from this site.
Not quantum mechanical particularly. It pertains to the fact that we live in a non-local space-time described as scientifically most recently by Schrödinger in the 1920s and then proved in the 1970s and 1980s. So the idea of non-local connections is not New Age. This is accepted in the physical community. The hottest topic in modern physics is exploring non-locality. It was described originally by the Buddhists 2,000 years ago, but modern physics has finally caught up.
Well, according to him, it's not so much quantum physics, even though I disagree. He even brought up Schrödinger. So, I mean, we can agree to disagree on that point. But it's interesting to me that physics is actually finally taking a look at this non-locality, that there are many serious researchers out there. And like I said, we know of Stanford and the Paralab at Princeton being 2 of them. But it is amazing to me that we're finally getting people who are breaking away from this dogmatic scientism and actually asking the questions that need to be asked.
The leaders of the program that we had at SRI are all physicists. The physicists are taking over what used to be called parapsychology.
A move that, in my opinion, is severely overdue. Parapsychology is the only thing we had in the academic realm that was willing to speak on things that weren't exactly the most scientism accepted ideas. So to see physics taking a serious look and taking over the research, I gotta say, way overdue, but extremely welcomed.
The three leaders of the program were myself and Hal Puthoff, who are both laser physicists, and Ed May, who is a nuclear physicist. And we were eager that our scientific friends would not think that we'd gone off the rails into ESP research, so we made sure that we published everything we did, all of our experiments, in the world's most prestigious journals, where we would normally publish our science. So we published our work in the Proceedings of the Institute of Electrical Engineers, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Institute of Physics, and Nature magazine. So this is not, I just want to emphasize that at the time we were doing this work, this was mainstream, written up in the New York Times, published in the premier journals in the world.
Which means the work that they did was extremely reviewed by their peers. This wasn't just some crackpot scientist throwing out ideas. These are being published in real journals for peer review.
And I want to give you an idea of where I was when this all began. In the 1960s, I was a hardcore laser guy. And here I'm standing in front of a 1,000-watt carbon dioxide laser at my most mavericky self. I'm trying to convince the government that I indeed had 1,000 watts coming out of this 1 meter package. And you see how we've got a little meter bar there. Government thought it's impossible because their lasers were 100 times bigger than mine. So I had 1,000 watts over something a meter long. They thought that is impossible. So it's like a reprise of what I was going to do 10 years later, trying to convince the government that some other impossible thing actually happened. So in this case, the idea is that I have a big fire brick. I'm going to drill a hole right through it and then hand the skeptical government scientists this big brick with a red-hot hole right drilled through it. And I'll ask them, do you want fries with that? And eventually they supported our program. They couldn't deny the fire brick with a hole. Today we would consider that kind of thing a paranormal object. There's no way to create a red-hot hole with a fire brick because it's not flammable.
What I would not have given to be a fly on the wall when he handed that scientist a fire brick with a hole in the middle cut by a laser that the scientist had said couldn't exist to begin with. And then asked him, would you like fries with that? Oh, that would have been hilarious. Anytime you can see a government agent or government scientist put back in their place by something that they consider impossible is always a fun story, right?
So that's what I had done. That was my career. I've been in laser. I was a laser pioneer. I was working with lasers many years before there were any lasers. So this was the outgrowth of my earliest studies in graduate school.
And as we know, the laser is one of many objects thought to have come out of the wreckage of the 1947 incident at Roswell.
So the question that led to my recent book, I wrote a book with a provocative subtitle, A Physicist's Proof of Psychic Abilities. And the idea is that proof is evidence so strong that you can't statistically or reasonably deny it. That's what we mean by proof.
I gotta say, I really like that answer. Evidence so strong you cannot reasonably or statistically deny it. I think that's a great definition for proof right there.
You can't prove scientific things in the laboratory the way you prove mathematical theorems. You prove things in the laboratory by piling up so much evidence that it's simply unreasonable to deny it.
Which, as you guys know, that is the philosophy that I use on this show to find enough evidence to prove, right or wrong, what I am saying. The case files that we go over, the amount of things that connect in all the case files, the different things we talk about on this show is to do just that, to create a pile of evidence so amazing that it's unreasonable to deny the existence. The Mandela effect is another great example. They all seem, or a lot of them seem like small, trivial changes, but how many grains of sand do you need to create a beach? How much evidence do you need before you've got enough proof?
So here we are in our laboratory, 1973. There's Pat Price in the middle. Pat Price was one of our great, great psychics. He was police commissioner of Burbank and retired. He's playing here with an ESP teaching machine that was the basis of our first NASA program. My idea was, can you offer feedback and reinforcement and help people improve their psychic ability with a little random game where you have to guess which picture will be illuminated? The answer is yes, you can learn. And the great good news for you today is that game is now available as a free application for your iPhone.
And I just checked on the Android, and turns out that is also available on Android too.
So I posted that as a little gift. It's called Esp Trainer, and you can just download it and have it on your iPhone. It'll ring a bell when you get the right answer and show you a pretty picture.
So if you guys are interested in testing or training your ESP ability, do check that out. Also, the site I mentioned last night has a game a lot like that too, where you try to choose which one is, which ball is under the hand, type deal. Or which hand the ball is under. You know what I mean. It's called ThetaStream.app. That's ThetasTream.app. ThetaStream.app. Also, that's got a good place to test your psychic and ESP abilities, as well as mind over matter abilities if you're interested. So there's two different applications that you can use to test those abilities.
So that's Pat Price. Price was an extraordinary psychic. He lived in a psychic bubble. He was an inspiration for me as to what ESP looks like in an evolved person. We were once called by the Berkeley Police Department, where Patricia Hearst was kidnapped, and they said, "We're so desperate, can you help us with your ESP program?" It shows how desperate they were. And Pat Price and Hal Putoff and I drove to Berkeley, and Price said, "Let's see your mug book." He's a no-nonsense guy, had been in lots of police stations. "I want to see the picture book with all the usual suspects." He turned the page after page, and said, "That's the guy, that's the ringleader." And he put his finger on Donald DeVries, who was indeed the ringleader. It's extraordinary. But they learned that only 2 weeks later. The police said, "Well, can you tell us something right now that'll help us?" And Price said, "Would you like to know where the kidnap car is?" And they said, "You're kidding." He said, "Well, so if you drive about 50 miles north on Bayshore Free on Highway 101, the kidnap car is a white station wagon. It's on the right, parked by a diner across from two large white gas storage cylinders in the pedestrian overpass across the freeway." And one of the detectives said, "Well, I know where that is. That's on my way to my home in Vallejo." 20 minutes later, they had found the car, and there are still cartridges rolling around on the floor of the car. That's as close to magic as I've ever seen in my 20 years in the laboratory. And
in my opinion, that is nothing shy of incredible. This is a psychic detective now. They've asked him to look into a case. He told them not only who the ringleader was, but exactly where to find the kidnap car that, let's be honest, only the kidnappers would have had that information, and they clearly weren't the kidnappers. They had to drive in from out of state to even help the police. So it's absolutely incredible that all that information came to him through remote viewing or psychic ability, the abilities that we all apparently have. And this goes to show right here, even just this one case goes to show that consciousness is much, much more than what we're told.
the other folks there are Bob Monroe, who wrote about journeys out of the body, how to go from remote viewing to an out-of-body experience, but that's outside our schedule for today. And I'm on the right 40 years ago, and what that shows is that if you live long enough, you get to do a lot of interesting things.
And Bob Monroe might be a name that you guys recognize. He is the founder of the Monroe Institute that to this day will teach one how to do out-of-body experiences and travel in spirit. Very interesting man. very interesting research that they have done over there. If you've heard of the Gateway document from the CIA, this is who it was based on, was Bob Monroe's work.
So this is the first in a series of experiments we did over a course of a decade, and it's basically what convinced the CIA to give us money. That is what we played is a kind of psychic hide and go seek. And all the pictures I'm going to show you are like this, so I won't reiterate. The way it works is Pat Price, or the psychic of the day, is in a shielded room, electrically shielded room with me. And Hal randomly is sent to an undisclosed location, random target picked by the lab director. He generally will go with the colonel from the Army or a lab director or a contract monitor. In this case, they went to a swimming pool complex called Rinconada Park. Price with me said, I see a water purification plant, I see a square pool 65 by 80 and a round pool 100 feet in diameter and 2 water storage tanks. That's what I see, and that's what he drew on the right. Actually, they had gone to the swimming pool complex, and when we got there for feedback after the experiment, we saw the swimming pool is really 110 feet in diameter, and the rectangular pool is 75 by 100. So viewed from 5 miles away, he had the dimensions architecturally correct to 90%. Now, he had added in these 2 water tanks, which are on the right side of the picture, which are not at the location. And it's not a water purification plant, it's a swimming pool. However, and that's a story I would tell up to about 10 years ago, when the city of Palo Alto sent us a picture book showing what the city used to be like 75 and 100 years ago. 75 years, the psychic ones know what the answer is going to be already. 75 years ago, this was a water purification plant, and the tallest thing in the city of Palo Alto were the 2 water tanks I show at the top, and Price drew at the left. So what he apparently did is move his awareness 5 miles south on Middlefield Road and describe the park where the guys were hiding, and then moved his awareness 75 years back to describe the biggest thing in the city. Off my schedule, I got to tell you, he also described a National Security Agency code facility in Virginia. And he described that, was able to read the file folders. And people wanted to know, why did you pick this to read? And he said, well, the more in psychic space, the more you hide something, the brighter it shines. So let that be warning to anybody who's having an affair.
The harder you try to hide something in psychic space, the brighter it glows. I love that. That is so amazing. Easy to find the secrets, right? And definitely watch out if you're having an affair. You will get busted by one of these psychics. Anyway, speaking of being busted, we are busted on time for the first half of the Dark Wolf's Den Show, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to take a short break right here, and we'll be right back after these messages. Don't you touch that dial. That's right.
We got to stoke the fires and run off the men in black. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Hi everyone, it's AJ. Are you enjoying this episode of the Dark Wolf's Den Show with Jerry Hicks? If you are and you haven't done so already, please make sure to thumb up that video, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell. You'll get our notifications every time we go live. We're here every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights, bringing you the very best of common sense radio, the Ripon Rabbit Hole. Now, a quick reminder that the weekend is going to start a little bit earlier for you next week. CSFL Champion will be doing Tuesday night videos, a special live event for our Backstage VIP members only. Now, the event does start at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central in the VIP Lounge, Tuesday, February 2nd, and it's going to be videos where we'll be exploring the music of Art Bell. So if you haven't done so already, please hop on over to Ripon Rabbit Hole and join our community. It's very easy to do. Sign up for a Backstage Pass, absolutely free, and you can take part in Tuesday night videos live with your host, CSFL champion. Starting your weekend just a little earlier. And you know what that does? That makes your week even shorter. That just makes common sense. Speaking of weekends, here's what we've got ahead for you. Friday night, I'll be back tomorrow, January 29th, with a look at Freely Speaking. Starts at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. All shows start at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. So join me tomorrow night as we speak freely and how it may have a price moving forward in 2021. Then Saturday night, we'll deal with fear itself. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And we'll end out the weekend right Sunday night with a look at independent. What does that mean? And why should we be paying attention to it? It's going to be a phenomenal weekend of content as we continue to explore down the rabbit hole together. I'm looking forward to spending my time together with you. We'll return back now tonight for Thursday, January 28th, 2021, to Jerry Hicks and the Dark Wolf's Den Show as he continues to howl at psychic phenomena. You're listening to the Ripon Common Sense Radio Network, the very best of common sense radio, the Ripon Rabbit Hole.
If you were meant to be controlled, you would have come with a remote, but you didn't. And that's why you listen to the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and welcome back to the second half of the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are talking about psychic abilities, ESP, remote viewing, the whole 9 yards, right? And how it relates to science itself. And there are many psychic detectives and things like that, and we've discussed a little bit of that in the first half, as well as the government's involvement in psychic detectives and psychic work. And we've been hearing tonight from a guy named Russell Targ, who is a physicist and parapsychologist who worked under the CIA in their programs. But before we go any further, speaking of programs, as you guys know, I am the founder of the International Mandela Effect Conference, and they are going to be starting a special program. I want to say they're going to do it monthly. That may change as time goes on, but it's called the IMEC Open Tables. That is IMEC, International Mandela Effect Conference Open Tables. This is going to be a live show they're going to be doing, myself included, and you can catch our first episode on the International Mandela Effect Conference channel on February 3rd, ladies and gentlemen. So do make sure you check that out. I will be once again a part of the panel over there, so I would love to see you guys along. And with that said, let us get back to tonight's topic. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the physicist and parapsychologist Russell Targ.
Demonstration of ability test that we had from the CIA. John McMahon, who's head of the CIA, said to us, "You guys are wasting your time looking at swimming pools and churches. We have targets that would be of national security help. Can you describe a target, and I'll send you the coordinates?" So Price and I climbed back into our little shielded phone booth, and he said, "Well, I'm psychically laying on a building, and a giant crane is rolling back and forth over my body. There's a huge crane. It has 8 wheels, 4 on either side of the building, And in this building, they're constructing a 60-foot steel sphere and they're welding it together. That all turned out to be entirely true. In fact, it was so true that after the steel sphere was verified, we then had a congressional investigation called by the House Intelligence Oversight Committee to see if there had been a security leak. This in the spirit of no good deed goes unpunished. But the Congress eventually said what we're doing is okay. We were supported by CIA and Defense Intelligence Agency and told to press on, and we pressed on for another 15 years.
Honestly, I think that's kind of funny. The House Intelligence Oversight Committee was so worried that they had seen this using psychic abilities that they wanted to ensure there wasn't a leak of information, which I gotta say is a smart move because that verifies exactly what the case we're talking about here is. If they verified there's no leak of information, which they did, and then said go ahead and continue your psychic work, which they did, then there's got to be a good bit of relevance to it, regardless, like Russell said at the beginning, of what you've been told.
Another experiment that I'll show you because it's of particular interest to me is that Hal Putoff then went to travel. I was the interviewer through all of these. My vision's very poor, as you've probably caught on, so I don't drive. And Hal was always the outbound person, and I was a stay-at-home psychic travel agent working with the person trying to elicit a description of the distant place. So this time, Hal was on a business and pleasure trip to Colombia, South America, and each day, Price sitting with me would describe, I see a church, I see a volcano, there's a harbor, there's a market, and on day 5 he didn't show up. So in the spirit that the show must go on, I said, well, I'll describe it. I've never done a remote viewing before, but I'd interviewed countless psychics and other visitors, so I knew the moves.
So he had never actually done a remote viewing before. Now, yes, I will keep in mind that he is a magician, but remote viewing and magic, again, are way separate things. This is not illusion. This is conscious ability.
So I said, well, this is Russ Targ, remote viewing with Pat Price. Price isn't here. When I close my eyes, I see something that looks like an airport on an island. There's ocean at the end of the runway. There's sand and grass on the right. There's an airport building on the left. That's what I get. And that's where he was. He was on an island airport off the coast of Colombia called San Andreas. My great coincidence of the day, as I was driving here, I was talking to the cab driver. He was from San Andreas and gave me a color photograph of the airport on the island. How's that for? This is my lucky day. I don't claim that's ESP. That's what you call a lucky day.
And one thing I found myself saying a lot over the years is, what are the odds, right? How synchronistic that he would be telling the cab driver that and he just happened to have a picture of that airport. Interesting, to say the least. Just synchronistic.
I finally escaped from the laboratory and got to travel across country, and 2 other people were psychically tracking me. The first place I went was New Orleans, and no one knew, of course, where I was. And I chose my target by throwing a die on the pavement. And the die sent me to the New Orleans Superdome. So I was standing in front of the Superdome recording my coordinates. This is noon, this is Russell Targ, I'm standing in front of the Superdome. It looks like a flying saucer shining in the sun. Bad thing to say. Back in the laboratory, my friend, another physicist, Gary Langford, very psychic, straight-up physicist, was working with Elizabeth Rauscher, who interviewed him. She's another physicist. All these people are professional physicists interested in the psychic stuff. Gary said, well, I have a clear picture of a circular building. It looks like a giant UFO. Do you think Russell's been abducted?
That's a heck of a conclusion. But he was thinking it looks like a UFO, so wow.
So Elizabeth said, just tell me what you see, make a drawing. And of course, his drawing was a remarkably accurate. This was his also first remote viewing. Gary just came in and said, well, I've been doing this all my life, avocationally. That's how I was an analyst, photo analyst, looking at specs of buildings and describing what's inside. So he was experienced to look at fuzzy images, but here we just took away the image, but it didn't interfere with his ability at all. Our great pleasure was then to have this Army intelligence ask us to train, to set up a psychic Army Corps, something like in the Men Who Stare at Goats, but not quite. No goats were killed in our program.
And I can also assuredly say that no goats were harmed in the making of this program either. Maybe the feelings of a couple sheep, but no goats.
But we chose 6 Army officers to work with us from a big, big group that we interviewed, Hal and I interviewed. One of those was Joe McMoneagle, Joe is still alive and is probably the greatest living psychic today, prodigious psychic. And his first trial, sitting with me, what's this remote viewing stuff? All of these people are basically tough Army officers, showed up in their boots and leather jackets and their patches and their backpacks. What's this psychic stuff? What do you want me to do? Betting their careers that this is a new, interesting juncture for them. So I described remote viewing, as I always do. I've been doing workshops now for 20 years. My ritual, the shibboleth, is close your eyes, quiet your mind, and describe the surprising pictures that appear in your awareness. Don't try and name it. Don't try and guess. Just describe the surprising images. And that language was understood 1,200 years ago and appears in Patanjali's guide, Self-Liberation for Seeing with Naked Awareness. If you want to move from suffering and conditioned awareness to freedom and naked awareness, sit down and shut up and quiet your mind, stop naming, stop guessing, and you're on your way. So that's what I'm still telling people following the 1,200-year-old guidebook. As an author, it's very nice for me to see a book still in print 1,200 years later. It gives me courage that my books will be around.
And in today's world, it is really hard to quiet one's mind. But if you are able to do this, I mean, I can't say I've remote viewed per se, but I know what he's referencing there when you just sit quietly, empty your mind, don't judge, don't guess, don't do anything, no thought, and just see what comes in. I've never exactly been able to make heads or tails of any, ESP psychic moments, or maybe that's what prepares me for those synchronistic psychic moments that I do end up having from time to time, what I think is randomly. I don't know, but it's good information to have, and if you would like to test this yourself and maybe pick a target of some type. I'm not sure how the target thing works when you're doing it like that. But if you'd like to test this for yourself, there's definitely some advice from Russell Targ, an expert, I would say, on this subject.
So Joe drew this picture. He said he and his colonel went with Hal Puthoff. And Joe said, I see a building with stripes in front and a long portion behind and a little fountain. He drew what was there, and of course the judges had no problem matching that. With our 6 Army officers, that I'll describe later, there's 6 people who had never done this before. I had them each do 6 trials a week, and we had each one, so we had 30 for 6 weeks, so we had 36 trials. You'd expect them to get 6 first-place matches by chance. We got 19 first-place matches, and they set up the Psychic Army Corps and ran another 15 years. They had 30 people on the East Coast working in tandem with the SRI group.
And of course, we all know when the government says they're no longer using a program, they've just made it to another level and put it in a secret category. I guarantee you to this day, the psychic program in the Army and CIA is still very well afforded and going. I don't have proof of that. I can't sit here and tell you I know that with 100% proof, but it is my assured belief that that is the case.
So this is Hella Hammond, the funny story with her. Hella is my dear friend for 2 decades before the SRI program, and they said, well, Pat Price is a fantastic psychic. Ingo Swann is the one who taught us how to do remote viewing. We want to see what a control person is. CIA said, what does an ordinary person do? Well, Hela's not exactly ordinary. She's a woman of the world, speaks many languages, professional photographer, but she thought it would be very amusing to be hired as a psychic of the various things that she had done in her life. So she came to work with us. The bottom line is she became the most proficient and most reliable person in the program for the decade, our control subject. Her first trial with me, as you catch on now, we're sitting in a shielded room. Hela says, when I close my eyes, what comes into my view is squares within squares within squares. That's what Hal Puthoff sees, and he was at a pedestrian overpass. Hela's 9 trials were even more significant than Pat Price's 9 trials. In Price's, the judge guessed 7 of them first place match. What that means is that if Hal Puthoff had been separated, had been kidnapped 9 times in a row, Price would have found him 7 out of the 9 times the first place he looked. Very remarkable. So here's Hela Hammond and Ingo Swann. Ingo taught us all how to do remote viewing. The way it worked is that Ingo taught Hal and me how to do remote viewing. Hal and I taught the 6 Army officers. The Army officers taught the world. So if you look at Google right now, we're still up on Google, and search for remote viewing, you'll find more than 2 million pages dealing with remote viewing, operational things to do with remote viewing. 2 million pages is quite a lot of pages for something that many people don't think exists.
And we find this going on also a lot in today's world. The mainstream media will tell you that something is or is not real or does not exist, when ignoring the actual evidence to the contrary. They just expect you're going to believe what they tell you. And that's been, sadly, the outlook on a lot of this stuff for a long time. Scientism being nonetheless any different. But always trust what you know. Don't let anybody gaslight you into believing what you know is incorrect, especially when you've seen the proof and you have the evidence and you know what you know. Never let anyone gaslight you into thinking that you are wrong. Stand on what you know and what you believe. And in this case, you've got over 2 million pages, as Mr. Targ said, of information on remote viewing and psychic ability, which is quite a bit for something that, once again, as Mr. Targ said, supposedly doesn't exist and isn't real. However, if you've been listening this whole month, then this would be yet but a walk in the park compared to some of the stuff that we've covered.
So at the end of the decade, reason for showing this is people get better in remote viewing. There's no decline effect. So at the end of the decade, we're still doing experiments with Hela, who is a kind of technophobe. She can change the batteries in her light meter, but she's a non-technical person. She finds physicists very amusing in their unworldly ways. But in this experiment, we gave her the coordinates for this in binary form. Someone was concerned that maybe she had memorized the globe. So we gave her the coordinates 1001110 west, 11 something north. She said, well, that's a pretty pattern. What comes to mind is a belly button shaped energy expander. This is your photographer, your artist, belly button. The target is the Berkeley Bevetron, which is indeed an energy expander. And she drew this middle drawing with the 4 beam tubes coming out of it, going to a target building, and the belly button shape is the Bevetron. And the picture from the laboratory is shown on the left. Now, I'd been looking at this picture for a decade, and it occurred to me as I'm writing my current book that my opinion, see, everything I told you up to now is true. My opinion on this picture is that she wasn't actually looking at the site, which is a big mass of concrete and steel, but she was looking 10 minutes ahead at her feedback picture, because her drawing is anomalously accurate to the picture that we showed her at a later time. So she was really cheating here. She wasn't looking at the Berkeley Bevetron. Instead, she just looked ahead a few minutes to see what we were going to show her for feedback.
You know it's dangerous when the psychic or remote viewer is using magic tricks to do along with remote viewing, right? She remote viewed, but she didn't remote view the target per se. She remote viewed the answer. Yeah, that's like taking a test and remote viewing the answers at the end of the test. That's pretty slick way to do it. Cheat, but really slick. It still involves using the remote viewing. She still had to use it to get to the picture later, but it's still astonishing just the same that she was able to do a mix of traditional magic along with true mental conscious ESP ability.
And in that process, she said, this is such a complicated thing. I can't grasp it. I want to make it out of clay. So this is her clay model of the Bevetron with the hole in it with a circular particle beam, 4 beam tubes in the target building, 50 miles to the north. She absolutely had never seen a Bevetron before. And of course, the people interviewing her had no idea what the target was. So how do we evaluate these things? The effect size is a measure of the power of the experiment you're doing, not necessarily the statistical significance. You can inflate your statistics by doing millions and millions of trials. The effect size takes out the fact that you've done millions of trials and says, how powerful is this experiment? So the idea of proof is that when the government was doing tests, the NIH was doing tests to see if aspirin helped men avoid heart attacks. They did this experiment, and eventually the thing had such a large effect size, they stopped the experiment because they didn't want to deprive the poor controls of the benefit of the aspirin. Got it? The effect size was so high, they stopped the experiment. The effect size got all the way up to 0.06. And here's the NIH report where the effect size is 0.06 standard deviations. All of our experiments exceed that by a factor of 10. So if the NIH thinks that this is my little argument for proof, if the NIH thinks that they have proven that all of you should be taking aspirin and the experiment is so strong you got to stop it and give aspirin to the poor controls, that's what they mean by proof. Stop the experiment as proven. Our effect size is 10 times what they had. So in our experiments we did with Pat Price, were significant at odds of almost 1 in a million, more than that 1 in 100,000. His effect size was more than 10 times the NIH. So this by itself is an experiment more than 1 in 100,000. In Hella Hammond's experiments, it was even more significant than Pat Price's experiments, even though she was a control subject. The Army people, which is sort of my pride and joy, in that we just brought in 6 guys, taught them to do remote viewing, and they did astonishingly well. Effect size, again, 10 times the aspirin experiment. And it was working with the Army people that led me on a career of doing workshopping for the past decade, traveling around, just teaching people to do remote viewing. On Google, you will find many, many people teaching you to do remote viewing. They all can teach you to do remote viewing. Remote viewing is easy to do. I have a chapter in my book where it describes if you work with a friend, you can quickly both become psychic. Remote viewing is a natural ability. You don't have to eat porridge at the feet of your guru or pay anybody thousands of dollars. This is a natural ability like vision or hearing. Psychic abilities are not sacred. They're abilities. They allow you to experience all kinds of remarkable things. And I'll talk about that in a moment.
And I love how nonchalantly he just states, these are natural abilities. We all have them. This is an ability given to us by consciousness. This is a part of consciousness that just isn't scientifically understood yet, at least as far as why or how it's able to happen. But if you're looking for proof that it actually does happen, I think Mr. Targ has more than went above and beyond with his experiments, showing proof, especially if proof is based on that aspirin experiment, then their experiments are undoubtedly, unquestionably, statistically correct, to the point that to deny them would be undoubtedly unreasonable.
But here are all these guys, highly psychic. At the end of our program, right after I left, I formed a little organization called Delphi Associates. We were using remote viewing to forecast silver futures, working with an experienced remote viewer. We did 9 forecasts, whether silver is going to go up a little, up a lot, down a little, down a lot. All 9 forecasts were correct. We made $120,000, which is a lot of money in the 1980s. And we're on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. BBC Horizon, Nova made a film about us. In the 1980s, ESP still existed. And there are now many, many organizations and groups of people using this associative remote viewing, which is invented by my friend Stephen Schwartz. It's a way of, even though you can't read psychically, it's a way of making substitute items for what you want to know. I can't explain that. You have to read my book, has a chapter on associative remote viewing, which is an easy guide to investing in the market. You do not have to give away your mind to be psychic. That's not required. You can be discerning and be psychic. I recommend that.
And I also recommend discernment. And what do you guys think? Using your own discernment. After what you've heard all month long, after what you've heard tonight, and what you've heard me give you all month long, what do you think? Do you think consciousness is more than just the brain? Have I put together enough proof, enough evidence over this past month to prove that consciousness is more than just a side effect of the brain? As a matter of fact, it is connected to a large amount of what is considered paranormal phenomena, and only because the understanding of how the phenomenon works isn't quite there. I've always said the paranormal is merely science that one has not figured out yet. And I really truly believe that is, especially when it comes to consciousness, there's mysteries about consciousness that we haven't figured out. That doesn't make them woo-woo. That doesn't make them supernatural. That doesn't make them necessarily paranormal. That makes them misunderstood or not understood at all. And if more physicists like Dr. Targ here, Dr. Russell Targ, and more physicists like Cynthia Sue Larson and Hal Puthoff, and these real physicists start to take this more and more seriously, we're going to see more and more of an increase in the knowledge base that's going to be gained about consciousness itself, especially when it comes to psychic abilities, remote viewing, and our close interconnection with each other, every last one of us on this world. And what do you guys think, guys? Do you think that I've laid out a good case? Do you think that remote viewing is real? It's something that is so real that it doesn't even take a special ability to do. It's something we can all do if we just practice. Like any other skill or ability, the more you practice, the better you are going to be at it. Now, I can't play basketball. And if I went out right now and practiced the rest of my life, I would never be Michael Jordan. I don't have the innate ability, but I could still be good at basketball. And there's no difference here, in my opinion. Even if you aren't a master psychic or a master ability to remote view, you'll still have the ability just the same, as we all do. And I think I have done my best to prove this, again, through the entire month of conscious talk and discussion, that consciousness is much, much more than what we give it credit for. Ladies and gentlemen, in the end, all you got to do is apply a little common sense, and you be the judge. We got to close it out. That's right. That's it for this episode of the Dark Wolf's Den Show for Thursday, January 28th, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. The den may be closing, ladies and gentlemen, but don't you worry, the weekend fun is only just begun. That's right. Make sure you come back tomorrow, Friday, January 29th, 2021, and join the other animal radio here on Ripon Common Sense Radio, Mr. AJ the Ripon Rabbit. That's right. He'll be back with a Ripon Rabbit Hole live show, and tomorrow night he'll be talking about freely speaking. That's right, freedom of speech is an inherent, innate, inalienable right that we all have, and one that we all need to make sure that we exercise every chance we get. So make sure you come back Friday, January 29th, 2021 for a discussion on freely speaking. And if you enjoy that, make sure you come back on Saturday, January 30th, 2021, where AJ the Ripon Rabbit is going to take back to the airwaves, where he's going to discuss fear itself. Ladies and gentlemen, it always, like I said last night, reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. There is nothing to fear but fear itself. And that's right. And the only fears we have are the fears we create. And to face them head on is the best way to get over them. And AJ, I'm sure we'll touch on that and much, much more on Saturday, January 30th, 2021 on the Ripon Rabbit Hole live show right here on Ripon Common Sense Radio. And all shows here on the Ripon Common Sense Radio start at 7 p.m. Pacific to 9 Central. That's right. Then on Sunday, January 31st, 7 p.m. Pacific to 9 Central, AJ the Ripon Rabbit will be back one more time to close out our extended 5-day weekend here on Ripon Common Sense Radio. That's right, on Sunday, January 31st, he's going to be talking about independence. Are you an independent person? Do you believe in independence? If you do, make sure you stop by and check it out. This is going to be a discussion I'm sure everybody will enjoy. And that's going to close out the weekend here on Ripon Common Sense Radio. And while you're taking your 2-day break for the week, that's right, Monday and Tuesday, you only get 2 days for a week around here. And we kick the weekends back off with the Dark Wolf's Den Show, of course, on Wednesday night. But in the meantime, make sure you hop on over to the RiponRabbitHole.com. That is RiponRabbitHole.com. Over there, you're going to find a variety of extraordinarily fun stuff. Check this out. First, you want to get on the mailing list. You want to get on this mailing list so you'll know every week, or weekend, I should say, what our topics are going to be. On Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, it'll be a once-a-week email you'll get Wednesday evening. And it will have all these listed in there, and you'll be able to keep up with what's going on Ripon Common Sense Radio. It is absolutely free. We do not sell your information. The only thing we use this for is to notify you what's going on with us, ladies and gentlemen. Also, while you're over on the RiponRabbitHole.com, make sure you jump down the rabbit hole. That is our social media alternative for those who enjoy free speech and like to talk freely about the topics they enjoy. Come on over where the conversation never ends and where the Ripon Rabbits hang out 24/7. That is down the rabbit hole at the RiponRabbitHole.com. Also, if you want to hang out with me right after this show, I'm going to be backstage. And the Backstage 24/7 lounge is available as long as you sign up for a Backstage Pass. Absolutely free. Come on over. Join us, RiponRabbitHole.com. Here in just a couple minutes, I'm going to be backstage, hanging out, waiting for you guys to come hang out with me. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, on behalf of Chick Mandela Effect, Michael Musco, AJ the Ripon Rabbit, everybody at Ripon Common Sense Radio, and of course I can't forget my good buddy Walt House. On behalf of all these folks, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf. And remember, until next time we meet, stay awake, but dare to dream. How yeah! Good night, everybody.
Some things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever home. Oh, what a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion? I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion.